The palace burned, and the king ran the other way. He heard her scream his name. He chose the woman who packed her bags before the first flame. They left the queen to die under the stone. But Alara was the one who kept the wolf kingdom alive, counting grain no one thanked her for. The pale-haired mistress wanted her ashes. A blood oath was broken. A throne would answer for it. She crawled from the rubble with cracked ribs and made one vow in the dark. Never beg again, a hidden northern kingdom rising. A dangerous alpha who saw her when no one else would. 47 names, a summit of crowns. A blade meant for her throat. They buried a queen, they should have killed her. Have you ever given a place your best years, only to watch it look straight through you when it mattered most? Keep that question close. Because tonight, you're going to watch a kingdom answer it. The fire began in the east watchtower of Stonereach at the third bell of night. It started quiet, the way the worst things always start quiet. A glow behind the arrow slits, a smell that didn't belong to any hearth. Then a guard's scream split the dark, and the scream said what the glow had been hiding. It was already inside the walls. It took the barracks in minutes. 2 floors. Then it ran down the inner corridor like it had somewhere to be. Like it had waited a long time for this exact night and meant to take everything it was owed. Black smoke poured through the stone in slow ropes. And then the drums began. 3 short, 2 long. Every wolf in Stonereach learned that pattern before they learned to hold a blade. It did not mean fire, it meant siege. The fire was only the door someone had kicked open from the inside. High in the surviving wing, servants ran without orders. Down in the lower yards, warriors spilled out half-dressed and reaching for steel. And in a kingdom built on the idea that strength keeps you safe, every wolf who heard those drums felt the same cold truth settle into their bones at once. Strength had not kept anyone safe tonight. Someone had simply walked in and lit a match. A kingdom is a strange thing. It looks like walls and a throne. It is actually 1,000 small acts no one ever claps for. The grain counted. The wells kept clean. The children fed through a hard winter. Pull those threads and the walls mean nothing. Tonight, every one of those threads was about to be tested by flame. And the woman who had quietly held most of them in her own 2 hands for 5 years was sitting in the throne hall, counting ledgers by candlelight. With no idea, the man who was supposed to come for her had already begun deciding she wasn't worth the trip. Her name was Alara. Remember it. By morning, half the kingdom would be saying it in the past tense, but that comes later. First, the man with the crown had a choice to make, and he was already making it badly. Theron was bent over a map when the drums hit, trade routes to the south. 3 generals around the long oak table. For 4 heartbeats after the first beat sounded, he did not move at all. His eyes stayed on the ink. His jaw worked slowly, like he was biting down on something with no taste and no end to it. Then he straightened, and the wolf who lifted his head was not the same one who had been studying tariffs a moment before. Something older and colder had surfaced in him, positions. Garrick was already crossing to the door. A broad wolf, a scar splitting one eyebrow, built like a thing meant to hold weight. East walls breached. Men in black, no crests on them, count unknown. 40 inside the outer ring, at the very least. Theron lifted the old iron sword off the wall rack in one clean motion, no thought in it. The grip had shaped itself to his hand over years of use, the leather gone dark and obedient. He knew exactly how to hold this. He had always known how to hold a blade. It was the softer things he had never learned to keep a grip on. Wake the 2nd barracks. Seal the armory before anything else. Send the 3rd regiment to the inner gate and hold it. Not one of those wolves reaches the throne hall. Then he paused. And this is where the night truly turned. Not at the fire. The fire was bad luck and bad timing. This was something else. This was a man choosing. Where's the queen? Garrick's eyes flicked sideways. Half a second. The kind of small betrayal in a face that most men would never catch. Theron caught it. Throne hall. Evening inventory. That's where she was last seen. He gave one short nod. Told himself the tightening under his ribs was strategy and nothing more. The queen was a symbol. After all, the Eastern bloodlines still lowered their heads to her name. Losing her in an assault would tangle the maps for a year. That was the reason his chest had gone tight. A clean reason. A reason a king could defend to himself at 3 in the morning. The trouble was, the real reason was waiting for him down a different hallway entirely, and some part of him already knew which way his feet were going to carry him. He walked out of the war room. He turned left. The throne hall was to the right. His feet took him left without putting the question to him once. Because left led to the private wing. Left led to Vesper. Left was the direction his body had learned over 3 years of moving through his own palace in the dark, telling himself the whole arrangement was temporary, convenient, something he could end any time he decided to. He had never once decided to. The private wing was already breathing smoke when he shoved the door open. Vesper stood in the center of the room, dark traveling cloak across her shoulders, a leather satchel already slung and buckled. Her pale hair loose and wild around her face. She was afraid. He could smell it on her, sharp beneath the cedar, but under the fear sat something that didn't line up, something that should have stopped him cold. She was already packed, Theron. She crossed to him and gripped his arm with both hands. Thank the old blood. I heard the drums. I didn't know if you'd... You're packed. Her fingers tightened on him. I'm a survivor. I plan ahead. He should have pulled that thread. A king with his wits about him would have asked what exactly a woman plans for, and when she'd started, and how she'd known to start before the first drum. He should have stood in that doorway and let the whole rotten story unspool from one loose stitch. Except her eyes were wide. Except her hands were trembling against his sleeve. Except she was warm and close and right there, and the smoke was thickening fast, and his mind did the thing it always did when she stood this near to him. It reached for the easy answer, stay with me. We go out the south passage. She folded against his side. They moved. He did not turn toward the throne hall. He told himself Garrick would send someone. He told himself the guards had already cleared her out. He told himself she was the careful kind, the composed kind, the kind who didn't need him specifically, who had survived 5 years of being barely tolerated in his court, precisely by being that self-reliant. He told himself every word of it in the 10 seconds it took his feet to carry him the wrong way. Then the screaming started, high, ragged, a frequency that snapped every wolf instinct in his body upright like a drawn bowstring. Pack bond recognition, not just trapped, cornered, out of room and out of time. His feet stopped without his permission. Vesper pulled at his arm. Theron. The south passage, that's her. A beat hung between them. Plaster dust sifting down, fire chewing at something overhead. The guards will get to her, her voice careful, polished. The kind of smooth that gets built on purpose, not the kind you're born with. The guards are fighting 40 men in the courtyard. He turned his head toward the sound. The throne hall. East corridor, then the vaulted anteroom, then the great doors. 3 minutes at a dead run. He could make 3 minutes. Vesper stepped in front of him and held his eyes. If you go back there, we both die. He looked at her for a long time, and the screaming kept reaching him through the stone, kept finding the dark corners of him and settling in. He stood in the crossroads of that hallway and weighed 2 lives in his hands with the cold arithmetic men learn to call pragmatism when they need to sleep at night. He moved forward. He moved with Vesper. Understand what that means, because the kingdom never forgave it once it understood. He did not try and fail. He did not falter and turn back too late. He ran the numbers, he saw the answer. He knew the answer was wrong and he chose it anyway, eyes open. His hand resting on a woman who had already packed her bags before the first drum sounded. The screaming stopped somewhere between the crossroads and the south door. The silence that came after was worse. It pressed into his ears like deep water. He pushed out into the night yard, and the smoke and ash and the far copper smell of blood hit his face, and he did not stop, and he did not look back, and he told himself the silence only meant the guards had reached her in time. That lie was going to have to last him a very long time. The throne hall died in the 4th hour of the assault. It came down in 3 separate collapses, not one. The first took the upper gallery. The second dropped the great iron chandelier into the middle of the floor in a burst of stone shards and choking dust. The third was the cruelest. It brought down the whole vaulted arch over the dais, the stretch of ceiling that had hung above every coronation, every judgment, every wolf who had ever knelt and sworn his life to the stone-reach throne. 4 feet of rubble. Burning timber stacked on top. By dawn, the attackers were dead or gone into the trees beyond the east wall. The survivors began the slow work of pulling at the debris. They found 3 dead guards near the main doors. They found the royal standard, half burned and curled in on itself like a closed hand, and against the far wall they found a wooden box. The quarterly grain records for the southern villages, open, the documents inside somehow mostly whole, sheltered by the curve of a fallen stone that had come to rest above them like a held breath. They did not find the queen. The conclusion arrived instantly, and no one argued it. The hall had been an inferno. The ceiling had come down twice in a row. No wolf without serious combat training and a builder's map of the structure in their head could have lived through the first collapse, let alone the second. And the queen, everyone agreed, was not the surviving kind. She was known as the quiet one, the careful one. The Luna who organized the winter relief shipments with her own hands and somehow knew the name of every child in the lower village. She could quiet a room, but never with authority. She did it with that particular stillness that belongs to people who learned very young to take up as little space as the world would let them have. None of that, the warriors agreed. Stops 4 feet of stone. So by midday they had written her into the past tense and turned their attention back to the living. And here is the thing that should sit with you. They were not cruel men. They were simply men who had never once watched her closely enough to know what she was made of. She had spent 5 years being underestimated by everyone in that palace. Tonight, that habit of theirs was become the single greatest mistake the kingdom ever made, because the woman they had just buried in their minds was not under the stone. Not yet, anyway, and not for long. Her name was Alara, and a woman who spends 5 years making herself small also spends 5 years learning exactly how little room she needs to survive. She had been cataloging the grain records for 40 minutes when the drums started. She did not run. She capped the inkwell, she set down the wax marker, she stood. 5 years of living in a palace that tolerated her rather than wanted her had laid certain habits into her, like grain into wood. She moved quietly. She finished the task before she let herself react to anything. She gathered facts before she let herself feel. Habits built the way a callus is built. Friction against the same rough place, over and over until the skin gives up on being soft. She opened the left door 3 inches and looked into the corridor. The smoke hit her at once. Not hearth smoke. Something dense and chemical, pitch and treated timber and old stone giving back a century of stored heat all in one breath, fighting to the right. Wolves running. She stepped back and read her options the way she read everything. The east door, the west door. The ceiling, where a fresh crack had opened across the great arch while she stood there listening. East led toward the courtyard and the fighting. West led toward the private wing. The ceiling groaned again, louder, and a thin ribbon of burning material slid down from the gallery. She crossed to the west door and opened it. A flaming crossbeam had fallen across the corridor and lay there like a verdict. The heat was a wall. She stepped back and shut the door, east blocked by men, west blocked by fire, ceiling coming down. She ran the assessment the way she ran all of them. No panic, no wasted motion. The clear economy of a person who has spent years solving problems no one else thought were worth solving. The supply roads. The water complaints from the lower village that the generals waved away and that she had quietly fixed over 3 years of patient bargaining. Small problems, exact solutions, no applause ever. Then she did something with no rational defense at all. She carried the records box to the far corner and tucked it into the angle where a stone column met the wall. There was no sensible reason to save grain ledgers in a building that was about to fall on her head. Maybe it was 3 months of work and 300 families who depended on what was written inside. Maybe she only needed her hands doing something that mattered while the world came apart, and then she heard his voice in the corridor, not the command voice that carried over wind and steel, the other one, low, tight. The voice he used when he believed no one was listening. She knew that voice the way you know a sound you have studied for 5 years. She knew which footstep meant he was troubled, which silence meant rage. She had learned the whole language of his presence without ever once being invited to, because knowing the moods of a man who didn't quite want you there had been her way of staying safe. Theron. It tore out of her before she chose to let it. Footsteps stopped beyond the east door. She crossed and struck the wood with her palm. Theron. The west corridor's gone. The ceiling is about to. The first collapse hit. The gallery above the east wall came down in one enormous blow that threw her sideways into the frame. Dust erupted from every seam in the room. She went to one knee, got her arm across her face, and waited for the world to stop shaking. When it did, she pushed herself back up, Theron. Louder now. Cracked open in a way she had not let herself sound in years. The way a voice breaks when the body understands something the mind has not yet agreed to. She drove her shoulder into the door. It gave a few inches. The frame warped, and through the gap she saw dim orange light, rolling smoke, and 2 shapes standing in it. She saw him, 10 feet away. His face clear enough through the haze to read, and she watched it happen in real time. The flick of calculation, the answers arriving. The knowing it was wrong, the choosing it anyway. She pressed both hands flat to the door and shoved. Theron. He turned away. The pale-haired shape beside him moved fast, and then both of them were gone around the corner, and the corridor held nothing but smoke. The door would not give another inch. The gap stayed at 12 inches at most, and above her the second collapse had already begun to speak. She stood with her hands braced on the broken frame, watching an empty hallway, and she understood the whole of it in one cold, soundless instant, not rage. Rage is a luxury, and she could not afford one. She turned from the door, crossed to the corner at a run, got down behind the column, pressed into the angle, arms over her head. She had time for exactly one full thought before the ceiling came down. It was not about him. It was not about grief or fury or the brutal math of being left. It dropped into her clean and cold, an anchor-finding bedrock. If I live through this, I will never beg for anything again. The second collapse hit. The dark that followed was total, and it had weight. She came back to herself in stages, the way you do after a blow that takes the lights out. First the pressure, then the pressure separating into sources, then the slow, careful inventory of each injury against the only question that counted. Can I move? Left arm. Pinned, not broken. A fragment had wedged against the column instead of crushing the bone. She could feel her fingers. She held on to that. Fingers meant the bone had held. Right side, 3 cracked ribs, maybe 4. Breathing was possible, just expensive. Every full pull of air cost her something she wasn't sure she had to spare. Head, a cut above the left ear. The blood had already dried, which meant she had been out long enough for blood to dry, which meant hours had passed, which meant the assault was likely over, and no one was searching the throne hall for survivors, because no one believed there could be any. The air was hot and thick with grit. She breathed shallow. She worked the trapped arm free over what felt like hours, and was probably 20 minutes, and when she had both hands, she began the slow, ugly labor of moving stone. She did not let herself think about him. She thought about load. She thought about the column, still standing, still bearing weight, which meant the debris above her had locked into a partial vault instead of a solid fill. She thought about inches. She thought about the simple fact that somewhere over her head was open air, and the only way to learn whether she could reach it was to keep her hands working. Her nails broke on the stone. Her ribs screamed with every larger piece she shifted. Twice she had to stop and press her forehead to the cold floor and breathe through the pain until it flattened into something she could carry. Then she started again. She did not call out for help. There was no help to call. She had learned that lesson in full, in one perfect demonstration, in the last thing she had seen before the ceiling fell. The air changed before she broke through. A shift in the drift of the dust. A coolness that made no sense unless something above her had opened. She changed her angle and found the gap 40 minutes later, fist-sized. Gray pre-dawn light coming through in a thin slant, the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She worked it wider. She was halfway through the opening when the hand came. Not from above. From the side, through a separate gap she had never found, from outside the rubble field entirely. A hand that came through the dark with absolute certainty, as if whoever owned it had known exactly where she was before they reached. It caught her wrist, not her sleeve. Her wrist, with the precision of someone locating a pulse. She went still. Don't fight it, low. Rough-edged, not a stone-reach voice. Something from further north, where the winters run 10 months and the language has been worn down to bare bone by people who could not afford spare words. I'll need to see your face before I trust it. Her own voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. A pause. Then the debris began to shift from the outside, large fragments moving with a force that should have taken a team of men, moved instead by one pair of hands. The gap widened. The gray light spilled in, and the man on the other side of the stone resolved out of the dark. He was enormous, not the thick-necked bulk of a palace warrior bred to frighten. Something leaner and more permanent than that, the build of decades of real use rather than display. Black cloak, dark hair, a jaw set as hard as the stone between them. Eyes a strange pale gray-green in the dawn, the color of ice over deep water. No crest, no livery, nothing to read him by, except that he had clearly met violence many times and been neither broken by it nor softened. Who are you? He didn't answer at once. He looked at her the way a man looks at a problem he has already solved, past the question of whether and into the question of how. Can you pull through with one arm? I asked you a question, and I'll answer it when you're not bleeding into a fallen ceiling. His grip on her wrist hadn't changed. Same pressure, same certainty. Pull through, or I widen the gap. She gave him 3 seconds. I can pull through. She did. It cost more than she let her face show. And when she finally cleared the rubble and came out into the cold ash-gray morning, her legs gave, and she went down hard onto one knee. She put a hand to the ground, held herself there, and would not let herself fold any further. She had made a decision under that ceiling, and she meant to start keeping it now. He crouched in front of her, not touching, just level, reading her the way a tracker reads ground, 3 ribs, maybe 4. The arms bruised to the bone, not broken, not a question. He was reading it off her breathing and her posture. Who are you? A moment. Draven. Then, after a pause that felt placed on purpose, south of the Greywater line they call me the Dark Alpha. I'll guess that means nothing to you. It meant something. The name had crossed Stonereach's intelligence twice in 3 years, both times pinned to reports the generals had filed under exaggeration. A wolf who held the northern forbidden lands, who had never once answered a territorial summons or lowered his head to any ruling alpha, who was said to move through fire and violence the way other men move through a market, without much trouble and without leaving many tracks. She had read those very reports herself, while organizing a filing system the generals couldn't be bothered to keep. And she remembered thinking, as she read the dismissals scrawled in the margins by her king's men, that the most dangerous trait in an enemy is the one you have talked yourself into believing isn't real. "You came here for a reason," she said. "Yes, tell me the reason." He held her gaze. The dawn was coming up full now behind her, the ruins of the throne hall showing their broken insides to the open sky. "I came to Stonereach to bring your king a warning. Word reached the north 3 weeks ago. A specific attack planned for this night. I rode 6 hours to deliver it. A beat. I was turned away at the gate. Something went wrong in her ribs. Or perhaps that was only the breath she took. Turned away, I was told the king was occupied. The palace was not receiving unaffiliated wolves. Another beat. By the time I'd talked the outer guard into carrying word upward, the drums had already started. She took it in. She held it flat in her mind and turned it over and let herself understand the full shape of it. The warning had come. The door had been shut. And the man behind that shut door had spent the same hour deciding which woman to carry out of the fire. "You pulled me out," she said. "Yes, why?" He weighed the question with a seriousness that was, she realized, the first thing anyone had handed her in 5 years that she had not needed to earn, negotiate, or apologize for wanting. "Because you were alive, and you had survived a thing that should have killed you twice over. In my experience, what lives through what should have killed it is worth understanding." She looked at him in the gray light, in the wreck of the kingdom that had left her to burn. Her ribs hurt. Her arm hurt. The dried blood pulled at her skin when she moved her jaw. She thought about the crossroads, the smoke, his face in the gap of the door, the calculation, and the choice that followed it. She thought about 5 years of folding herself down to fit a space that was never built for her. She thought about the records box in the corner of the rubble, still intact under its skin of dust. 300 families. 2 months until the winter distribution. She thought about the Luna, who had organized those ledgers and smoothed those supply lines and learned every name in the lower village, and who had set tea on her king's desk and waited, always waited, to be chosen. She thought about the decision she had made in the dark. "I need to know something," she said. "The northern lands, the forbidden country past Greywater. Is there room there for someone with nothing left here?" His pale eyes moved over her face, not the look of a man weighing a woman. The look of a man checking a stated fact for accuracy. "You have something left here. You just named it," she didn't follow. 300 families. The winter distribution, something moved in her chest that she had no name for. "That's not. I'll send 3 of my people to handle it. Quietly, it will be done." She stopped and looked at him. He waited. "Why would you do that?" "Because you were about to ask, and it's a fair ask. And whoever's left standing in that palace right now will not put a grain list above their own wounds." A pause. "And because if you're coming north, I would rather you come without a debt you can't repay." The logic of it was so clean it almost hurt. She pushed herself to her feet. It cost everything she had, and she did it without reaching for help and without folding, and when she was up, she was all the way up. She looked at the ruins of the palace she had given 5 years to, and she did not flinch once. Then she turned north. "Walk with me. Tell me what you know about the country past Greywater." He rose and fell into step beside her. Neither of them looked back. They were 40 feet from the rubble when the surviving gates began to open, and the first patrol came out into the dawn. Alara drew the hood of the borrowed cloak over her head, and they passed through the long morning shadows along the outer wall, and no one saw them, and no one called out, and the gates swung shut again behind the patrol, and the morning went on without her in it. For the first time in 5 years, she breathed without the tightness that comes from standing in a room you were never fully welcomed into. It felt like a door closing behind her on a house she hadn't understood was suffocating her until she was already outside it. The Queen of Stonereach was dead. The whole kingdom would believe it by midday. They were wrong. And one day, every wolf who'd believed it would have to sit in a hall and look at exactly how wrong they had been. By mid-morning, Garrick came to find his king with the news already shaped to fit the face. Theron had prepared to receive it. Nothing recovered. "Given the state of that hall, she's gone." Theron stood at the window with his back to the room. "Say it the way it goes in the record," a breath. Queen Alara is presumed dead in the collapse of the throne hall. We hold search operations through midday. Then we close them, begin the announcement. I want the territory lords totaled before it reaches the common quarter. He did not turn around when he said it. He had learned in the last few hours that his face was a thing he could no longer fully trust. He walked back toward the surviving wing, and Vesper was waiting at the mouth of the corridor. She had changed into clean clothes, pinned her hair, arranged her features into a shape that approximated grief, the correct measure of sorrow, the correct restraint, all of it calibrated for an audience that might be watching. She reached for his hand as he passed. He let her take it, and he kept walking, and he said nothing, and some cold instrument far back in his mind noted that she had grieved exactly on schedule. He did not eat that day. He sat in the war room and stared at a map of his own territory and tried to feel nothing, because nothing was safer than the specific thing that was building under his sternum like water behind a cracking wall. Late in the evening, alone, the door bolted, the candles burned down to drowning stubs. He finally let his head drop between his arms on the table and stayed that way a long time. He saw it every time his eyes closed. The crossroads, the smoke, the sound of his name in her voice, because it had been his name. He understood that now that the chaos was gone and nothing was left to muffle it, and then his own feet, carrying him the other way, and the silence that followed. He told himself he'd had no choice. He told himself at dawn, and at midday, and in the long black hours of the first night when sleep would not come, and the smell of smoke still lived in the walls. He told himself he'd had no choice. He almost believed it. And the small remaining piece of him that didn't was the piece that would, in time, undo everything Vesper had built. He just didn't know it yet. What none of them knew, what no wolf in that grieving palace could have guessed, was that the woman they were busy mourning was already a full day's walk to the north, alive, awake, and quietly deciding what to do with the second life the fire had handed her. The march took 4 days. Alara paid for every mile of it. Her ribs filed their complaint at each step, and she gave them the smallest scrap of attention they would accept, and spent the rest of her mind on the 6 wolves moving around her, learning them, reading which ones followed Draven out of loyalty, which out of cold calculation, and which out of the third thing, the thing that takes toll when a person has been nowhere their whole life, and someone finally hands them a somewhere. The compact one was Senna. 2 short blades, one at each hip, a stillness that suggested she had mapped every exit before Alara finished walking into camp. "You're hurt worse than you're letting on," Senna said on the second morning. "I know what I'm letting on. Most people don't." Senna had been driven out of her own territory 3 years back. She had refused a mate bond assignment from her alpha, which in certain southern lands was still law with real teeth in it, and she had killed the male they handed her before she walked away. She told Alara this the way other people report a change in the weather. Flat. No apology folded into any of it, and you stayed with him. Alara nodded toward Draven, ahead of them on the track, a shrug. "He doesn't ask for things I'm not willing to give." A sideways glance. First time that was ever true of anyone. Alara understood that in the bone before she understood it in the head. She had built a picture in her mind from the word she'd been handed. Survival. Started from nothing. She expected canvas tents and watch fires and the provisional look of people who knew they might have to run on an hour's notice. She was wrong about all of it, and the size of how wrong she was did not become clear until the 4th afternoon, when they crested the long ridge and the valley opened up beneath them. She stopped at the top and did not speak for a while. Whatever she had braced for, it was not this. What lay in the valley below her was not a camp. It was a town, not a large one, not a wealthy one, but real and permanent and clearly built by people who intended to stay. Solid roof lines, a central road with purpose to it. Cut channels carrying mountain runoff down to terraced plots on the south-facing slopes. Cook smoke rising thin and domestic and straight in the windless cold. And children, visible even from the ridge. "You built this in 8 years," she said. "We built it." Draven stood a few feet off, watching her read the valley rather than watching the valley himself. "That's the part you need to take in before we go down. There's no eye in what's below us. Every channel, every roof, every argument over where the water should run. 400 people solved that, together. My part was holding the space long enough to let them." She looked back at the green of it. The impossible green, because the maps were wrong. She had memorized those maps across 3 years of quiet administrative work. The grain routes, the water rights, the same handful of resource corridors the southern alphas fought and refought over like dogs at a single bone, and the north always sat there as a blank, not disputed, not claimed, just empty. The cartographer's version of a held breath. The forbidden country isn't forbidden because it's dangerous, she said. It was not a question. No, it's forbidden because the men who drew the maps needed everyone to believe it was. He was quiet a moment, watching the side of her face like it was a thing he had been waiting to see do exactly this. Easier to own a place if you can convince the world there's nothing in it worth taking. She filed that away. Then she said the thing she would repeat to herself many times in the years to come. Blank space on a map is just land somebody wants you to stop looking at. And there is the first lesson hiding in this story, the one most of us learned too late. The world is full of people the powerful have agreed not to see, folded into margins, written off as empty. And the moment someone finally looks, really looks, the whole convenient map starts to fall apart. She walked down into the valley to start looking. The first thing she asked for was every supply record they had. The man who held them was Osric. Somewhere in his 50s, the hands of a wolf who had done 40 years of real agricultural work, the wary set of a man who had been improvising the administration of a whole town alone for far too long. He had built a system out of nothing, and he was not going to enjoy watching a stranger in a borrowed cloak take it apart. He didn't. "This isn't broken," he said. The first time she spread his ledgers across a plank table. "Folks eat. Nobody's starved a winter yet. You're distributing by household. Way it's always been done. Which means single adult homes run short, large families run long, and the long ones quietly trade the surplus. So there's a whole barter economy running underneath your records that you can't plan around because you can't see it." She tapped the page. "It works. It just can't grow. The day this town outruns your memory, the whole thing tips over," his jaw set. Because she was right, and he knew she was right, and being right was not the same as being welcome. She did not soften it. She did something better. "You built something that works out of nothing," she said. "That isn't a small thing. I'm not here to replace it. I'm here to scale it past the point where one good man's memory has to carry the whole picture." He looked at her with the expression of a man who has just been told his work mattered, and is bracing for the second half of the sentence, the part where the praise turns into a blade. There was no second half. It took 3 weeks. Then he started bringing her the problems he'd been carrying alone, not because she had won an argument, but because she had left him standing taller than she found him, and people remember who does that for them. She mapped the hidden barter economy instead of crushing it, formalized the channels, brought the invisible thing into the light, and let it keep working there. The population was 460 when she came down the ridge. By the close of the first year, it was 640. Word moves through lands without roads, the way water finds the low ground. Through traders, through travelers. Through the accounts of people who passed a valley in the mountains and saw a thing they had not been told to expect, a town that ran on functioning systems and answered to no master demanding tribute. They came north, and every one of them was processed the same way, not with suspicion, not with open arms, with one flat, practical question. Can we carry another mouth? And does what this person knows match what this place needs? Which is exactly how she finally learned the truth about the fire. He arrived in the second autumn, older, a long scar down one forearm and the watchful flinch of a man who had spent years on the wrong side of contracts. He gave a name she didn't bother to keep. He had come north, he said, because the work he used to do had finally cost him more of himself than he could keep paying. "What work?" she asked everyone. "The kind nobody writes down. Be specific. Specific is what earns a roof here." So he was specific. He had been a hired blade. 2 autumns back, a contract south of the Greywater line. A palace job. A heavy purse. Strange terms. The terms were the part that had stayed stuck in his teeth ever since. Alara went very still. The east wall, he said, had not been breached. It had been opened. From the inside, by someone with a key to the lower postern and a reason to use it. The crew had not fought their way in. They had walked in. And the purse had come in 2 halves, one from the man who organized the blades, and one from a woman who had met the organizer twice, in the dark, and never once gave a name. Pale hair. A kind of patience that made a hardened man nervous. "Describe the timing," Alara said. Her voice flat as a held knife. "We were told to move at the 3rd bell. Told the warning rider would be stopped at the gate. Told the king would be occupied in the private wing and the throne hall would be soft." He paused. It went exactly the way they said it would. Down to the bell. Cleanest job I ever worked. Never wanted to work another. The room held its breath. Or perhaps that was only her. Because for 2 years and most of one, she had carried the fire as a thing that happened to her. A catastrophe. An accident of war that a coward had failed to walk back into. It was not an accident. The fire had not chosen where it started. A person had. And the warning that could have stopped all of it had not merely been ignored. it had been planned around, arranged in advance to never arrive. The shut gate she had filed under carelessness had been a hinge in someone else's design. Vesper had not simply taken advantage of a burning palace. She had lit the match, or paid the hand that did, which in the cold light Alara now lived by came to exactly the same thing. She thanked the man. She gave him his roof. Then she sat alone in the administrative room until the candle drowned, and she did not weep, because she had spent that particular currency long ago, and what stood in its place now was harder and more useful. A clarity that ran without tears to fuel it. Fire doesn't choose where it starts. People do. She wrote it on a scrap of paper. Then she held the scrap to the dying candle and let it burn, because some truths you keep in the bone and never in the file. And here is the cruelty inside that knowledge. The night she had spent 2 years calling her ruin had been, from the very first ember, a thing somebody designed on purpose, with her death penciled in as a line item. The question was no longer how she survived a tragedy. The question was what she would do now that she knew it had been a plan. Now turn the clock back and turn south. Because months before that hired blade ever climbed the northern ridge, the kingdom that buried her had already caught its first glimpse of the truth. It was roughly 6 months after the fire. A Stone Reach border patrol had crossed a convoy on the old Greywater track, a road everyone in the south had filed as impassable for 15 years, since the northern bridge washed out. The convoy moved fast, moved organized. When the patrol called for crest and name, it did not stop. They tracked it 2 miles before the ridge cut them off, and their best look came from a high vantage. One of them sketched the escort's crest from memory, a crown over a field of ash, and rising out of the ash, a wolf stands, unbroken, facing north. The report sat unopened on Garrick's desk for 3 days, because the kingdom that survived the assault was drowning in the wreckage of its own administration. When he finally read it, he read it twice. Then he went to find his king. Theron was in the war room. He was always in the war room now, a man who needed the hard geometry of strategy to hold himself in one piece. Maps, supply lines, problems with clean edges, problems that answered to force. Garrick set the report on the table. Northern Patrol. 3 weeks back. Theron read it without lifting it, his face doing the careful nothing it had gotten so good at doing, until his eyes reached the bottom, the sketch, and stopped. A crown. Ash. A wolf standing. Burn it, he said. Garrick did not move. Sir, burn it or don't. But understand before you decide. This is the 3rd report like it in 6 months. The first 2 I handled without troubling you. I'm bringing you this one because the escort numbered at least 30, moving in formation, under a crest no herald can name, on a road that's been dead for 15 years and apparently isn't anymore. 30 wolves in formation is not a thing I can keep quiet. Theron looked up. 30 wolves. A dead road opened, a sovereign mark nobody could place. All of it built by someone with the motive and the resources to turn the impossible into a supply line. Origin, unknown. They were already moving when the patrol found them. Direction, north. Into the forbidden country, he laid both hands flat on the map. The same hands, in the same posture they had held, the night he made the choice that started all of this. He looked at the sketch of a wolf standing in ash, and somewhere underneath the strategy, in the part of himself he had spent half a year successfully ignoring, something began to shake. Quiet inquiry, he said. No official channels. Independent sources only. I want to know who that mark belongs to, and what they're building. Garrick took the report and paused at the door. And if the inquiry turns up something that changes what we believe about the night the throne hall fell? Theron did not answer, so Garrick left, and the king stood alone with his hands on the map, telling himself one more time, with everything he had left, that the silence that morning had only ever meant the guards reached her first. He pressed his knuckles into the wood until the bones ached. A wolf, standing. A hand, reaching through fire. Somewhere north of the Greywater line, something was being built. And it was being built by a woman who, according to every record in his kingdom, should have been Ash. Alara found the second betrayal the way she found everything. By looking at it longer than anyone expected her to, it began as a discrepancy. A small one, the kind that does not announce itself, the kind only a person who carries the whole loop in her head would ever notice. The convoy route had been anticipated. The southern patrol that tracked it those 2 miles had not stumbled into it by luck. They had been waiting at the one stretch where the ridge gave them eyes, as if someone had told them exactly where to stand, which meant route details known to a small circle had walked south, which meant the leak was inside the valley. She did not accuse anyone. She narrowed. She fed 3 slightly different versions of an upcoming supply run to 3 different points in her own command, and she waited to see which version surfaced in the south. It took 11 days. The answer came back through a traitor Senna had turned, and it traced to one mouth. His name was Tomas. A quiet man good with the irrigation channels, who had arrived the first spring with nothing, a wife and a daughter not yet weaned, no one's idea of a traitor. Which was precisely why it had worked. She had him brought to the administrative room. No guards in sight. Just Senna at the door and Draven against the wall, present and silent, leaving the room to her, which was its own kind of statement. Sit, Tomas. His hands would not hold still. I know it's moving south. I know it's moving through you. I won't ask whether. I'll ask why. The answer decides what happens next. His composure broke in one clean line, the way thin ice breaks, all at once. They have my brother, back home. Someone filed a claim, pack law, a reclamation. They told me they'd let it die if I sent them what I saw up here. They said it was small things, routes, numbers, nothing that would hurt anyone. Roots get people killed, Tomas. I know. He put his face in his hands. I know she let the silence work on him. Because she had once been a person who did small wrong things to keep something she loved safe in a place that offered her no clean options. And she knew the shape of that cage from the inside. Who filed the claim? He looked up. It came through Vance territory. But the man who warned my brother described the one who set it moving. Pale hair. Patient, there it was again. The same hand, working the same liver from the far side of the world. Vesper did not want the North. Vesper wanted leverage over the people inside it, and she had found it in the one place Alara had not finished armoring. The threads of family that still tied her settlers back to the south. Here's what happens, Alara said. You don't run. You don't get sent into the snow with a child on your back. You confess this to the council in the open, and you let the consequence land where it lands. And I will deal with your brother myself, because no one in this valley loses family to a paperwork war, while I'm the one who decides. Thomas stared at her. He had walked in expecting a blade. He was being handed a debt he could actually repay. Why, he whispered, because punishing the desperate is just cruelty wearing the costume of justice. And I've worn enough costumes for one life. When he was gone, Draven spoke for the first time. You could have made an example of him. I did, she said. Just not the one she wanted me to make. The full count came 2 weeks later, and it was far worse than one man's brother, 47. 47 reclamation filings, lodged against 47 residents of the settlement, spread across 4 southern territories, timed to land in the same season. Each one a legal hook driven into a person who had come north precisely to be free of that machinery. Each one valid under pack law as it currently stood. Each one a small surgical act of fear, aimed not at the strong walls of the town, but at the soft human seams running through it. Alara read the list standing up. She read it the way you read a wound, and she finally understood the whole of what she was facing. A rival who wanted your grain could be managed. You simply made it cost more to take than to trade for. But a rival who wanted your destruction, whatever the price to herself, was a different order of problem entirely. Vesper was not trying to absorb the North. She was trying to make certain no one ever could, before it grew solid enough to become a real alternative to the kingdoms that had spent a generation telling everyone these lands were empty. She wasn't reaching for a seat at the table. She was trying to burn the table down so that no one else could ever sit. Senna's hand had drifted toward her hip. Osric had gone very still in the way of a man bracing for a blow. Draven watched her, having already run the same arithmetic and arrived at the same wall, waiting only to see where she would land. If we fight these one at a time, Alara said, we defend on 4 fronts with no standing and no name, and she picks us apart a family at a time while we tell ourselves we're lucky she hasn't sent soldiers. Then we don't fight them one at a time, Draven said. No. She set the list down with the exact economy of a woman who had learned, across 2 years, to spend on every task precisely what it required and not one motion more. The only thing that makes a reclamation filing worthless, she said slowly, is filing it against a citizen of a recognized sovereign land. So we stop asking the South to leave us alone. She looked up. We make them recognize us. In the open. In front of all of them at once, the room went quiet in a way that had texture to it. The dense quiet that arrives when everyone present understands, at the same instant, that a line is being crossed that will not uncross. The summit, Osric said. Barely above a breath, the summit, she confirmed. The summit of alphas. Convened by tradition only for true territorial dispute, or for the birth of a new sovereignty. Attended by every recognized alpha in the southern lands. The last one had been called 11 years ago, for a border crisis that had stood 3 days from open war. Calling it now, under their own banner, was not a request. It was a declaration. She watched Draven run the chain she had run, and watched him land where she had landed. If we walk into that hall as a settlement asking for recognition, he said, we hand them the story. We stand as an equal sovereign power, or we don't stand at all. Yes, that means a title. A real one. She held his eyes a moment, because she knew exactly what a title meant, and exactly what she had spent 2 years deliberately not becoming. She had built a town that did not claim ownership over its own people, on purpose, holding the structure loose so that it stayed genuinely shared and never curdled into one more version of the Alpha-Oun's everything kingdom that most of these people had fled. Taking a crown would change what she was. And she was honest enough to sit inside that change for the 10 seconds it took to truly understand it, rather than strategically swallowing it whole. She thought about the Luna who had counted grain in a palace that never wanted her. The woman who had crawled out of stone in the dark with cracked ribs and no help coming and stood up anyway. The 47 names on the list. The 1100 days she had spent, making herself the smallest version of a person that could fit inside someone else's house. The Luna she used to be would have waited to be handed a title. She was done waiting to be handed anything. For 5 years she had set tea on a man's desk and waited to be chosen. Now she would walk into a hall full of the same wolves who had called her homeland a blank space, and she would not be a petitioner asking for a seat. She would be the one who decided who sat. Queen, she said. The word came out clean with no apology trailing it. If I stand in that hall, I stand as Queen of Nightreach. Not affiliate, not survivor, not the woman who used to run grain routes for a king who left her to burn outside. The valley moved through its ordinary morning. Cook fires, children walking to the learning hall, the shift change at the Eastern Watch. 900 people now, going about the loud, daily work of being alive and meaning to stay that way. She had stopped asking for a place at the table long ago. She was going to build the table, and then she was going to make every wolf who had ignored her sit down at it and look hard at what she had made out of the nothing they had thrown away. The messenger left at dusk. The call went out into the dark, south toward the line, toward a war room where a king was still rehearsing a comfortable lie, and toward a pale-haired woman who was at that very moment setting 47 small traps and believing she still had time. The clock had started, and this time Alara had built it herself. The summit of Alphas convened on the first hard frost of the northern season, 2 years and 9 months after the night the throne hall fell. 16 territorial lords, 8 allied Alphas, 4 neutral observers who had ridden weeks to be there, and whose presence alone told the southern courts that the northern call had been taken far more seriously than any of them had planned for. The conclave hall had been raised 3 generations earlier for exactly this. Neutral ground, kept by all the major territories and owned by none. High stone walls and one long central table, built to carry the weight of decisions meant to outlast the wolves who made them. The hall was full when the southern doors opened, and it went quiet the way a room goes quiet when something walks in that rewrites what the room had believed about itself. Alara entered first. The black armor had been made in the valley by a wolf named Magnus. 20 years as mastersmith in the eastern lands before he left under circumstances he never explained. He had found in the settlement's administrator a client whose specifications were exact and whose opinions on armor were specific. She wanted iron built to work, not to frighten. He had given her both. Fitted to her frame, shadow gray inlay at the collar and the shoulder, a single mark above the breastplate, a crown, the lines so clean they read as a sentence rather than an ornament. The crown on her head was real, not ceremonial gilt. Worked iron and black stone, made by the same hands, built to be worn by a woman who meant to do work in it. She walked the length of the hall at the pace of someone who had never once been in a hurry and did not intend to learn now. She did not enter like a woman asking permission to exist. She entered like the answer to a question the room had been too proud to ask. Draven came half a step behind her left shoulder. He wore no crown. He needed none. Every alpha in that hall knew the name, and every one of them had at some point built a policy on the quiet assumption that the Dark Alpha would never set foot in a southern venue, because he stood outside southern relevance entirely. That assumption was correcting itself in real time, and they could all feel the correction. She reached the head of the table. She did not sit. She gave the room exactly enough time to finish revising its expectations. Then she looked to the far end. Theron was there. She had known he would be. He had aged in a way that had nothing to do with years. The same jaw, the same dark eyes that sharpened under pressure. But something had worn thin in specific places, the way stone wears thin underwater, not breaking, only becoming less of itself. The easy authority still sat on the surface. Underneath it was something she had never seen in him before. The look of a man staring at the consequence of the worst thing he ever did. After that consequence has grown into something his imagination never offered him at the moment of choosing, she held his eyes for 2 seconds. Level, unreadable. Then she looked away, the way you set down a thing you no longer need to carry. Nightreach calls this summit to establish sovereign recognition, she said to the hall. We present documentation of our borders, our census, our infrastructure, and 3 years of governing ourselves and feeding ourselves without aid from any southern territory. We request standard sovereign status under the existing compact. She paused. We also have business with this council regarding a pattern of interference directed at our territory. By at least one party currently seated at this table. That sentence moved through the room like a stone dropped into still water. Heads turned. Suspicion rearranged itself into new shapes. She let her gaze settle on no one long enough to name them, which was its own kind of message. Let them wonder. Let every guilty wolf at that table wonder whether she meant him. The Lord of Greyvale spoke first, Aldrich. An old wolf who had survived 4 territorial wars by the simple skill of being the most reasonable person in any room. Queen Alara, he tested the title the way you test ice on a pond. The documentation will need review by the council's advocates before any recognition motion can. The documentation is already in front of you. It was placed at every seat before the doors opened. You have each had 40 minutes. She looked at him directly. How much more do you need? Aldrich looked down. The wolf beside him was already 3 pages in. The matter of interference, said the Lord of Vance. Corin, sharp-featured, carrying the energy of a man who had walked in expecting to control the framing of the day and had just watched that plan evaporate. Perhaps we ought to address that claim before recognition. We address it in the order I presented it. Recognition first. The interference may bear on the recognition vote. It will, she said. Which is precisely why it comes second. She watched Corin do the arithmetic and arrive at the understanding that pressing the point any further would confirm rather than deflect. She watched him decide to stop. The review took 4 hours. Advocates examined documents. Lords asked procedural questions. The observers conferred in low clusters at the eastern wall. Alara answered every question without elaboration. Draven answered the boundary questions with the same economy. Senna, seated at her left, produced supporting records as they were needed, with the smoothness of someone who had prepared for every question that was asked and several that had not been yet. Theron said nothing for 3 hours. She was aware of him the whole time, the way you stay aware of a wound you have learned to work around. She did not look at him. She felt him looking at her, and she managed it the way she managed everything now. By doing the work, in the 4th hour, when the observers had delivered a preliminary word that the documentation was sufficient for a sovereignty motion, he spoke. I want to speak to the interference claim. Before the vote, the room shifted into a different quiet. That item is second, she said. Without turning, the vote won't mean anything if the claim is what I think it is. Because if it is, this council needs to know the source before it casts a single thing. She looked at him then. He was leaning forward, both forearms on the table, his eyes on her with the directness he had only ever shown her in the private hours, the ones she had spent 2 years working to unremember. Not performance, not strategy. The thing that lived under both. Then speak, she said. He straightened. And he did the single hardest thing a proud man can do. He said the true thing in the worst possible room. The unofficial message I sent north 12 days ago was intercepted. He did not lower his voice. I sent it through a private channel. Someone in my court accessed that channel and used what was inside it to approach another territory before my own envoy had even received a reply. The purpose was to poison an alliance before it could form. He looked down the table at Corin. That's a serious accusation, Corin said. I have the writer's account. I have the timeline. I have a letter in your own advocate's hand, confirming that the first approach came out of my court, carrying information that could only have come from my private correspondence. He paused. And I know who in my court has been operating outside my authority for 3 years. The hall stopped breathing. She watched what it cost him. The full public dismantling of his court's appearance of order and of his own appearance of a man in command of his own house. He did it anyway. Vesper, he said. The name landed and stayed. She has been conducting her own diplomacy with my resources and my name, without my knowledge in more than one matter. The approach to Vance was one. There are others. He looked at Corin again. I expect you received more than one letter. I expect the first arrived weeks before the second. Corin said nothing, which was its own confession. Understand what you are watching here, because it matters. This is not the hero of the story. This is the man who started the fire of all of it, the man who calculated her life against his comfort and chose his comfort. And here he was, voluntarily setting his own reputation on the ground in front of every power in the South, because the alternative was letting a lie stand that hurt her one more time. It did not undo what he did. Nothing undoes what he did. But there is a particular kind of courage that only shows up after a man has already failed the great test of his life and lost everything that mattered. And Theron, far too late to save what it might have saved, finally found his. And that was the exact moment the northern doors opened. The hinges were heavy iron, built to hold against force, and the sound they made was wrong for any scheduled entry. The guards who should have managed those doors had not managed them, which meant whoever came through had come through them. Vesper walked into the conclave hall with 6 stone-reach wolves at her flanks and a document case beneath her arm, carrying herself with the forward momentum of a woman who had aimed at a single moment for a very long time and had finally arrived at it. Dressed for formal court, pale hair pinned with a consort's sigil that Theron had never granted and apparently never revoked, which told the room something about how that house had been running in his grief. She set the case on the table with a control that was its own kind of speech. The council should hear all parties before it votes. Smooth, calibrated, built for rooms exactly like this one. Vesper, low. A warning, she did not look at him. She opened the case. I hold reclamation filings for 47 individuals currently residing in the northern settlement, lodged with 4 southern territories this morning through independent legal channels. She looked at Alara for the first time, the look of a woman who has carried a weapon a long while and has finally decided to use it where everyone can see. Valid under existing pack law, they predate this summit. They are not subject to a vote taken in this hall today. 47. Filed that very morning. She had moved faster than even the full count. Ahead of the season Alara had planned around, Alara kept her hands flat on the table, kept her face level, and thought at the speed that genuine crisis demands. Not panic, not the freeze. The accelerated clarity that arrives when a situation strips away every option except the ones that take everything you have. If the filings held, those 47 had a legal duty to return south for judgment. If she resisted without recognized sovereignty, she was obstructing legitimate territorial law, and if the recognition vote got tangled in the filings, it could stall for months. Months Vesper would use. She looked at Aldrich. He was already reading, and his face told her the filings were exactly what Vesper claimed. Under the table, Draven's hand found hers, not gripping, present, then gone because she did not need it held. She needed it offered. She stood. I move for an immediate sovereignty vote. Before this council processes one filing or one further word, she looked at Aldrich. The question is clean and the documentation is complete. Call it the filings, Vesper began. The filings are dated this morning, her voice flat as struck iron. A sovereignty recognition, if it passes, runs retroactive to the date our settlement became self-governing. Our documentation places that 3 years ago. Any claim against a citizen of a recognized sovereign territory is void on arrival. She held Aldrich's eyes. Call the vote. Aldrich looked around the table. At the observers drawn into a tighter knot. At the documents in front of him, with the eyes of a wolf who had run territorial law for 30 years and knew precisely what she had just said. And whether it was true, it was true. He knew it was true. We vote, he said. Vesper's hand went to the case. Her composure shifted, not breaking, reaching its edge. This council does not have the authority to. This council convened this summit, Aldrich said. It has exactly this authority. It is the only thing this hall exists to do. He looked around the table, all in favor of immediate sovereign recognition for Nightreach. On the documentation presented and reviewed, I, Draven. Instant, I, Aldrich, the lord to his left. I, Greyveil second. Both observers. She counted without moving her eyes from the center of the wood. 9, 10, 11. Corin was silent, looking at Vesper, then at the table, then at the precise weight of being on the wrong side of a vote that was only going one direction. Aye, he said, quietly, the sound of a man choosing his future over his old debts. 12, 14. Aye, Theron said. Even, 15, the final count was 15-1. The single refusal came from a minor southern lord who had ridden in with Vesper's colors on his saddle, and whose seat in that room had just become a great deal more complicated. Nightreach is recognized, Aldrich said. Sovereignty effective retroactive to the date of established self-governance. The filings are void under the new status. They will be returned without action. The room exhaled, and the thing beneath Vesper's composure reached the surface for the first time in all the years Alara had known her. Not defeat, not calculation. the look of a woman who has moved her pieces toward a single outcome for years and is watching it become impossible in real time, and whose answers to the impossible is not acceptance. It was acceleration. Her hand came out of the case holding something that was not a document. The hall came apart. Two things happened in the same heartbeat. Draven was already moving before the blade was fully clear, not toward Vesper but toward Alara. And Theron was moving too, from his end of the table, the opposite direction, the same destination, the same speed, for the same reason. The blade was meant for her throat. And it was going to miss, because she had already shifted, and because two men were converging on the gap between her and it. Theron reached her first. By 3 steps, no more. He put himself between her and the arc of it with the totality of a man who has stopped calculating odds and is simply acting from the deepest layer of himself, the layer beneath strategy and politics, and the long catalog of every wrong choice he ever made. The blade caught him across the upper chest and the left side, not the throat it had been aimed at. And the sound he made was one she had never heard from him. He went down to one knee. She caught him. She did not decide to. Her hands moved before the choice could form, and his weight came against her, and his blood was warm and immediate through the fabric of her sleeve, and she went down with him to the stone floor while the fight broke and reorganized around them. Senna moving through Vesper's wolves with cold precision. Draven's voice cutting through the noise and turning it into orders. Theron looked up at her, blood at his mouth from the fall, his eyes shockingly clear. The clarity of a man who has crossed into a place where the weight of everything he has been carrying simply no longer applies, because there is only this moment, and this wasn't face above him, and nothing else with any claim on his attention. Still breathing, he managed. Don't talk. His hand found her wrist, light. He had little pressure left to give. I need to say it, not to fix anything. I know it doesn't fix anything. I need to say it because it's been 2 years and 9 months, and I have been saying it to an empty room, and I am done saying it to an empty room. I left you in the fire. I saw your hand. I ran the numbers and I walked away, and I have not had 1 clean hour since. She kept the pressure on the wound. Practical. It was deep but not killing. She had read enough wounds in 2 years of northern disputes to know the difference. You're going to live, she said. I know. I'm not asking you for anything. I didn't put myself in front of that blade to ask. I want you to know that, I know, but Vesper was already gone. The northern door, in the second, the fight turned. The Conclave's private corridors. Built for exactly the kind of exit a woman who plans contingencies would know. In a hall she had attended for 6 years. The settlement wolves were moving, but into an unfamiliar building, and Vesper had a head start measured in the precise seconds of chaos she had created to buy it. Alara stood. She looked at Draven across the cleared floor, where 3 of Vesper's 6 were down and the other 3 knelt under Senna's blades. Where, the silence answered before anyone's mouth could. She went to the northern door. Draven fell in at her shoulder. The passage opened onto cold stone and dark, and the sound of footsteps already fading ahead. She moved into it without slowing. Because she had once crawled out of burning rubble in the pitch black with broken ribs and no help coming, and she had learned one thing from it she would never unlearn. The dark was not a thing to fear. The dark was only a room nobody had lit yet. The passage ran north, then west. In a long bend she could feel more than see. A draft at the far end. An exterior door left open by someone who had stopped caring about her trail. She came out into thin morning light and frost and scanned the slope. The Vesper, 40 yards up the ridge. Court dress traded for a traveling cloak she had kept underneath the formal layers. Planned for. All of it planned for. She heard Alara come through the door and she turned. She did not run. That was the thing that told Alara everything. A woman running is a woman operating on fear. A woman who turns and stands has made a decision, and whatever Vesper had decided in the seconds between the hall and the slope, fear had not authored it. Alara walked toward her, steady, blade in hand, eyes on the woman's hands. Right hand visible, empty. Left hand inside the cloak. 10 yards out, she stopped. Left hand Vesper brought it out. A short blade, the kind built to be carried hidden and used close. She held it at her side, low. You won the vote, she said. The smooth voice. Still smooth, though something was working hard underneath it now. Got everything you wanted, not everything. You filed 47 claims against people who left their homes to build something better. People who had nothing to do with whatever lies between you and me. They spent last night afraid. Pack law. I know pack law. I wrote 3 briefs on it while you were decorating my husband's court. I know it well enough to recognize that you picked the one mechanism that puts fear into the most people with the least exposure to yourself. She paused. That isn't strategy. That's cruelty with paperwork stapled to it. Vesper's jaw tightened. The first true crack since she had walked into the hall. You want to talk to me about cruelty? Her voice rose. You, in your crown and your black iron. 5 years I watched you, setting tea on his desk, learning the names of children who weren't yours. Waiting, just waiting for a man to decide you were worth choosing. And he never did, and you never left. And the whole court knew exactly what it was watching, and not one of them cared enough to say so out loud. Something moved through her face. Not the surface, the older, harder thing beneath it. I didn't take anything from you. I took something from a woman who had already set it down. The frost caught the light in small, bright points. The thin trees stood silent. Alara let the words land where they fell, and she looked at this woman and asked herself, honestly, whether what she was hearing was true. She had asked it before, in the long working nights up north that left enough silence for honesty. Whether the waiting had been love, or habit, or the particular paralysis of a person who cannot picture a different life. Because every door out demands she first admit the current room is killing her. The answer was yes. Partly. In the complicated way of things that are true without being the whole truth. You're not wrong, Alara said. Vesper's eyes shifted. I did set it down. Every day for 5 years, I set down the parts of myself that made him uncomfortable. And I called it love. It wasn't love. It was management. I managed his comfort at the cost of my own presence in my own life. She paused. But that doesn't make what you did right. It only makes it easier. Those are not the same thing. The blade in Vesper's hand moved. Not rising. Just shifting. The way a body moves while it works through something the mind has not finished. He was never going to choose you, Vesper said. Quieter now. The calibration mostly gone. I want you to know that, not to wound you. You spent 5 years waiting on a version of him that did not exist, I know, Alara said. I've known for 2 years and 9 months. I knew it the moment I saw his face in the gap of that door and read the calculation behind his eyes. She looked at the woman across from her with the clarity of someone who has been given a very long time to arrive somewhere. What took me longer to understand was this. His failure to choose me was never proof of my worth. It was proof of his limits. 2 different things. I confused them for years. Vesper went very still, put down the blade. A long moment, the frost, the light, the thin trees on the ridge. Vesper set it on the ground at her feet, with a precision that was more surrender than she had meant to show, and stood back up, and there was nothing managed left in her face. Just the actual human under 6 years of court performance, tired, angry, genuinely at the end of something and unsure what waited on the other side. What happens now, she said. You go back into that hall. You answer to the council for the assassination, the filings, the intercepted correspondence. The council decides the rest. She held Vesper's gaze. I won't argue for severity. I won't argue for mercy. I'll answer their questions honestly. And I'll let the process do what the process is for. Why? Alara considered it, because the question deserved that. Because I spent 2 years building something I'm proud of. And the woman I had to become to build it doesn't have room for the satisfaction of watching you suffer. That woman didn't survive the throne hall. She paused. What walked out of it doesn't need your ruin to feel whole. She bent and picked up Vesper's blade from the ground, held it by the flat, and offered it back that way. Not the handle, the flat, which said she was returning it as an object and not a weapon, which said she was not afraid to stand within arm's reach of this woman. Vesper looked at it. Then she took it, and they walked back through the passage together, not speaking. When they came back into the main hall, Senna moved to take Vesper in hand, and the council was on its feet, and the room rearranged itself around the new information of what it was looking at. The proceedings took the rest of the day. Vesper was held under the council's authority, pending formal review. The minor lord who had ridden in under her colors was removed to face his own territory's process. Corin made a statement long enough to be a public accounting and short enough to suggest he had consulted an advocate about exactly how much to admit. The 47 filings were voided in the official record, with language that set a precedent protecting the settlement's people from then on. Alara watched it happen and felt the plain, quiet sensation of a long thing completing. Not triumph, not hollowness, just the fact of an arc reaching its end. Theron was tended by the council's physician throughout, the wound dressed and sealed. He was upright and present for the proceedings, which clearly took something from him she could read in the careful economy of his movements. He did not perform being fine. He simply was present, which was its own discipline. When it was done, he caught her eye across the room. She made a decision and crossed to him, pulled a chair to a reasonable distance, and sat. What you built, he said. I read it during the review. The water system. The allocation framework. He stopped. It's the grain brief you wrote in your second year. Modified. The original had structural inefficiencies. Something complicated moved over his face. Not a smile. Something less comfortable than one. I never read the original. A steward summarized it for me. She took that in. The flat way you take in a piece of information that arrives 3 years too late to change a single thing, Theron. I know. You left me in the fire. You saw me reaching, and you ran the math, and you made a choice. Then you spent 2 years telling yourself it was the only choice on offer, because the alternative was living inside the one you actually made. It was not the only choice. There was another one. You knew its shape. It was harder, and you did not make it. He held her gaze. His jaw worked once. He did not look away. Yes, I survived it. And I built something out of what you threw away that is larger than either of us. I'm not telling you this to wound you. I'm telling you because you spent 2 years saying it to walls, and you are owed the experience of saying it to a person. And I am owed the experience of hearing it acknowledged instead of managed. It is the worst thing I have ever done, he said. Steady. Rough. Completely unmanaged. Worse than anything the wars cost me, because those had causes outside myself. This was just me, choosing wrong on purpose, in full knowledge. I see your hand reaching through that gap every time there is firelight in a room. I don't expect that to stop. I am not asking you to make it stop. She looked at him a long while. This was what honest pain looks like, carried for years without ever being set down. I don't forgive you because you deserve it, she said. I'm not sure deserving has anything to do with forgiveness. I forgive you because carrying the grudge is rent on a room I don't want to live in anymore. The settlement needs the part of me I've been spending on staying angry. I've decided that's a poor use of resources. He almost laughed. It hurt him too. That is the most you thing I have ever heard. Yes, something settled in the air between them. Not the old thing rebuilt. Something honest and contemporary, made out of what they actually were now, instead of what they had been. The peace two people can reach when they finally stop needing the other to have been different. Take care of the wound, she said and stood. Alara, she waited. I'm glad you didn't die that night. So simple it was almost stark. No performance left anywhere in it. I'm glad I didn't either, she said. She walked back to Draven, who stood at the northern end, where he had been for the last hour, watching the proceedings wind down with the patience of a man who understood that some things have to finish themselves without interference. He read her face the way 2 years of honest proximity had taught him to. Done, he said. Not a question. Done. They rode out the next morning, frost lifting off the conclave grounds in the climbing sun. She did not look back. She had learned that looking back is only useful when it teaches you something for the road ahead, and she had looked back enough. She had taken from that night everything it had to teach, which was this, that she was the kind of person who reaches through fire, and the only thing worth doing with that knowledge was building a life that deserved it. She had built it. 900 people in a valley the maps called empty. A spring surplus coming in for the first time. A learning hall with 91 children in it. The water channels. And the man riding beside her, who had pulled her out of the rubble not because he wanted anything from her, but because she was alive, and that had been reason enough. Nightreach rose ahead in the late morning light. The ridge, the valley, 900 cook fires sending up their thin straight lines against a cold blue sky. She rode toward it without slowing, a woman who had earned every mile beneath her and every foot of the ground ahead. Now, before you go, stay with this part, because it matters more than the crown, or the vote, or the blade on the ridge. There is a difference between being chosen and being seen. For 5 years, Alara got neither. She set the tea down. She remembered the names. She held a whole kingdom together while the people inside it looked straight through her. And the man at the top of it called all of that keeping nothing at all, right up until the morning he needed it and it was gone. How often do we do the same thing? Walk past the quiet ones, the ones who keep the lights on and the books balanced, and never once raise their voice to be thanked. We read their silence as weakness, we read their patience as permission, and then one day they are gone. And only then do we add up everything they were carrying the whole time. She survived being left behind. But here is the truth she found in the rubble, in the dark, with her own broken hands. Being left was never the worst thing that could have happened to her. The worst thing would have been staying. Spending the rest of her years as a smaller version of herself, handing the best of what she was to a house that was never built to hold it. So notice what she did with the woman who tried to destroy her. She did not sink the blade. She did not need to. She handed it back, flat, and let the process do its work. Because she had figured out that a grudge is just rent you keep paying on a room you do not even want to live in. Real forgiveness is not a gift you give the person who hurt you. It is the key you use to let yourself out. And notice what she built. Not with armies, not with fear. With competence and patience and the willingness to count the grain when no one was watching. The quiet work the loud people never respect, right up until the day they realize it was the only thing holding the roof up the entire time. So here is what I want to leave with you tonight. Who in your life has been carrying something heavy, quietly, for a long time, without being thanked for it? And how long has it been since you actually looked at them and let them know you saw it? And if you have ever been that person, the one nobody noticed until you were already gone, the one who walked away from a place that was slowly suffocating you and discovered who you really were on the other side of that door, then tell me about it. Drop your city in the comments and tell me one thing you walked away from that turned out to be the making of you. I read as many as I can, and I want to know where the strong, quiet ones are watching from tonight, because the woman they wrote off as too soft to survive did not just survive. She chose herself. And in the end, that was the only choice that ever truly mattered.